Welcome to the Half Empty, Half Full radio show on the TAN Talk Radio Network with your host, Laurie Zoock, the consumer champion. So listen up every Thursday night from 11 p.m. to midnight and learn something new. All opinions are that of the hosts and guests. Have a story idea? Contact us through Facebook on Half Empty, Half Full. We want to hear from you. And now, here's your host, the consumer champion, Laurie Zoock.
Welcome to the Half Empty, Half Full Talk Radio Show. I'm your host, Laurie Zoock, and each week we'll be discussing problems and solutions, changing negatives to positives, and helping you, the consumer, to get smarter faster. My guest today is Joellyn Robles, and she's from Hillsborough Title. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Laurie.
And we're going to be talking about what you as a consumer need to know about title companies. You know, we hear title all the time, and I think people don't even know what it is half the time. So maybe, you know what, first, can you share with our listeners a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. And again, Laurie, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And yeah, I've been in the Tampa Bay area since the late 80s, and I've spent about the last 4 years serving as a marketing representative here in our local market with Hillsborough Title. Prior to that, I was a title closer, so very knowledgeable about the ins and outs of what a closing entails when you're either purchasing or selling or refinancing your Florida real estate property.
Okay. Now, I want to talk about what a title company does. Okay, let's say I'm planning to buy a house. What is a title, and what is the role of the title company in that process?
Okay. Well, the title refers to a legal document that evidences a person's right or ownership to a piece of property, also sometimes called a deed. The deed is the actual document, and then title shows the evidence. And what a title company does, they make sure that the title to a piece of real estate is legitimate, and then they issue an insurance policy for that property. Title insurance protects the owner of the property or the lender against any lawsuits that may arise or claims against the property that result over disputes over the title.
Okay, so that leads me right into the second question.
Mm-hmm.
You know, can you explain the differences or explain the terms of clear title, clouds, and liens? Because I hear those words lots of times.
Sure, and very common terms in our industry, of course. Clear title means that the title to the property is free of any liens or legal questions as to ownership. So having clear title is great. That's what you want to have. A cloud on title means that there could be a question surrounding that title. Any condition revealed by the title search that could adversely affect the title to the real estate. And usually clouds on title can't be removed except by either a deed, a release, or some sort of court action. So cloud on title definitely is not good to have. You want to get that cleared up.
Yep, I can imagine that. Now, title companies serve as the middleman, right, between a borrower and a lender. Why is that? Why doesn't it go right? You know, if I'm buying a house, why is there a title company? What's the purpose?
Sure. Yep. The title company does serve somewhat like a middleman for the transaction. They facilitate the transaction by adhering to the terms of the contract that's between the buyer and the seller when you've got a purchase sale involved. But the title company also adheres to the lender's closing instructions. So if you've got a buyer that's going to purchase a property with financing from a bank, the title company's also responsible for making sure that the lender's closing instructions are adhered to, or how they are to close that loan for that buyer. So ultimately, we play a role in facilitating all of those parties in helping that transaction, come to fruition.
Okay. Now, who chooses the title company? The buyer, the seller? Because, you look way back to the market when the bubble burst and all the shenanigans that were going on, and people chose certain people and things like that. Who gets to choose the title company?
Great question. Now, typically, it's the party that pays for the cost of the title insurance is the party that gets to pick. In our area, it's customary for the seller to choose, but other parts parts of the state like Sarasota and Miami-Dade, it's local custom for the buyer to choose. But I do want to point out that it's just customary. There is no law or regulation that dictates who the party is that gets to choose. And ultimately, it's another term of the contract that can be negotiated between the parties. More frequently, we tend to see buyers picking the title company, just a trend that we've sort of seen take hold lately.
Yeah, I would think if I were buying a house, I would want to be the control freak and control everything on my side, as opposed to having it done from the lender's side. But my understanding is that it's a neutral party. You're following the rules from the lender and then trying to make it as simple as possible for the buyer. Correct.
Correct. We follow the rules of the lender, but also the terms that were in the contract, the purchase contract that the buyer and sellers agreed to.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, I did a little research online, and I read this. It said, title companies issue title insurance for the new owner of the property, the owner's policy, and also to the lender, which is the lender's policy.
Correct.
And that this works somewhat similar to hazard insurance, and the insurance protects the deed, which is the owner's policy, and the deed of trust, which is the lender's policy. Okay, I read that and I went, oh my gosh, what does all of that mean? So can you kind of put that in perspective in layman's terms so just a regular person can understand it?
Sure. Like you said, ultimately what a title company issues is a title insurance policy. It's an insurance product. And there are two types of policies that we issue. An owner's policy that protects the purchaser of the property. It gives them assurance that there are no issues associated with their purchase of that real estate and that they have clear title. The lender's policy, if you've got a transaction where there's financing involved, we issue a lender's policy that protects that lender's interest, basically stating that there are no other mortgages in front of that lender's mortgages and that the lender is in first lien position. So again, it's meant to protect the owner's or a lender's financial interest in the real property against any loss, either due to title defects, liens, or other matters. And it'll defend either party against lawsuits attacking the title as it is insured. So it reimburses the insured for any actual monetary loss that's incurred up to the dollar amount of the policy that was issued.
Okay, so how do you actually, when you're checking on a title, when somebody's purchasing a property, how do you find out, like, what's the process that a person would go through from the title company to make sure that there's clear title? Are you going to public records to see if there are liens on that property?
Great question. Now, the consumer, they don't really have to do anything. If you've got a good, reputable title company, what they do to make sure you've got clear title is they do first search public records. They will search for any items that could attach to that piece of real estate that could be a potential problem. So they check for mortgages that could be attached to that property for the current owner or possibly previous owners. They check for construction liens, any matters of public record that will attach to that piece of real estate. And they check those to make sure that they either are satisfied and that they're not an issue. If they are an issue, then they need to be addressed prior to closing.
Is it possible that something could not be in public records, but be an issue on the title? I'm asking you the tricky questions today.
Yes, and that's actually a really great question. There are matters that could not appear on public records that could be an issue, and we check for those also through what's called a municipal lien search. Over the last several years, because of all the foreclosure inventory that was in our pipeline, the meltdown that we had, what we had happen is a lot of folks stop paying their utilities, perhaps they let the property get run down, and you've got code enforcement.
Like HOA type things. You didn't pay your HOA.
Right. And those unrecorded matters are typically associated with code enforcement issues or municipal items such as past due water bill, and those past due water bills could attach to the property. So those items don't necessarily get on public record right away, but they could later on attach to the property. So the newer contracts that are being used by a lot of real estate agents account for that and require that in addition to a public record search, that municipalities get searched as well for those code items or municipal water items.
Gotcha. So that's where you're doing, from a title company's end, your due diligence to check out every possible cloud, every possible judgment or lien on that property to make sure there's nothing before it goes to the next person.
Correct.
All right. We got about a minute before we go to break, so I'll ask you this, and if we need to continue in the next segment, we will. But does a title company deal with real estate taxes and recordings? And if so, why is it important?
Sure. Well, real estate taxes, making sure that those are paid, and then the documents, making sure those are properly recorded, are just some of the duties that a title agent is responsible. So if those things aren't done correctly, it could cause a cloud on title, which you don't want. Any cloud on title is a bad thing. So if you're not doing your job correctly and not making sure those are paid and items recorded correctly, it could cause issues for sure.
Gotcha. All right. Well, we're going to take a short break, so stay with us and we'll be back in just a sec.
Do you suffer from back, neck, or body pain? Do you suffer from migraines or have jaw or face pain? Has conventional medicine failed you? Were you injured or in an accident? Call chiropractic physician Dr. Dan Maddock at 813-935-1664. Dr. Dan has helped thousands of patients gain relief for more than 30 years. Dr. Dan is caring, gentle, and takes his time with each patient. He's also a past president of the International Craniopathic Society, a special certification of only 300 chiropractors worldwide. Dr. Dan helps patients from the neck up and the neck down. Dr. Dan accepts most insurance plans. Don't continue to live in pain. Call 813-935-1664 today. That's 813-935-1664 and get on track to better health.
Hello, I'm Jim Velasquez. Does getting a lousy 1% on your CDs make you sick to your stomach? Inflation is hovering at 3%, so what's really happening? Allow me, Jim Velasquez, to send you my free report. If you haven't reviewed your CDs in a while, don't get this report. It will break your heart. If you want to fight back and beat the bank, text RETIRE to 72727 for this free report. Let's beat the bank. Text RETIRE to 72727 for your free report.
You're listening to the Half Empty, Half Full radio show on the Tan Talk Radio Network. And now, here's your host, the consumer champion, Laurie Zoock.
And welcome back to the Half Empty, Half Full radio show. And I've been speaking with Joellyn Robles. She's from Hillsborough Title. And a lot of people don't even know what a title is, and she's been explaining that. And we're going to kind of go on. I'm going to ask her a bunch of questions so that, all of you listeners can understand what it is. Now, are laws for title companies different in each state? And if so, how so?
Well, they are, Laurie. They definitely vary from state to state. However, I'm licensed in the state of Florida, so I can only speak to the requirements of our state.
Okay.
But there are some differences and differences in local customs and things like that when you go travel through the country.
Okay. Now, is there ever a time during the home buying process when a title company might not be used?
There could be, certainly, but for most, when they purchase their home, it's one of the largest investments that they make. So might not be, a prudent decision to make such a large purchase without having that investment protected.
I gotcha. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about common title problems, because I actually looked up on the internet and came up with this big, huge list.
Yes.
So we have plenty of time to talk about it.
Sure.
One was errors in public records. And, it's funny, I'm a credit consultant, and I see that all the time. And I know from that end, it's very difficult to resolve because whatever's in public records is handled by people who work for the government.
Yes.
And it's a slow-moving snail to get things corrected.
Yes.
So maybe you can talk about that. Do you see them, and how can you possibly correct that?
Sure. Well, errors in public record can encompass several things. It could include a deed getting recorded in the wrong county. That's actually the biggest error in public records that we see. If you're familiar with the Lutz area, Lutz, Florida has a portion of Lutz that's in Hillsborough County and a portion that's in Pasco County. So you have to know which county that property is in and record your documents, appropriately. So errors in public records is a big one. And, one of the ways to get it corrected is to obviously record in the right county in the first place.
Right.
But then each clerk's office has their own procedures to get those items fixed. So that is a big one.
And I'm thinking out loud here. I would think that if you're a local title company, you would know the difference between which county a town is in. But if you're maybe making a purchase out of state and you just look it up and whatever pops up first, you think, hey, that's the county.
Right.
And maybe that's what happens. Now, what about unknown liens?
Unknown liens, again, we talked about that a little bit earlier. Common unknown liens could include code enforcement, and the reason that they're unknown is because they haven't put them on public records yet, but it's a pending item, with that department. And speaking to that, I kind of wanted to back up a little bit and just point out that not all title companies automatically check for that. It's in the new contracts, but not all title companies are aware to checks, and they do have an exception in the policies for some of those unknown items. And these could occur if the current owner, let's say, within 30 to 60 days of selling their piece of real estate, let's say they got some work done by a builder or a contractor. If they didn't pay that contractor has the ability to file a lien. Let's say the closing takes place in that in-between time.
Okay, that's what I'm thinking, right?
Yeah, and your seller doesn't disclose that. Well, the title company's not aware, the buyer's not aware because it wasn't in public record yet, but that's something that could
happens.
Be an issue, and
so
it happens.
What happens if that happens? I mean, I'm sure that's probably happened in the past. So, if I'm a buyer, boy, I'm going to be really upset to find out that news. So now what happens? I have to, as the buyer, wait until the seller satisfies that lien, or is it somehow negotiated by me as the buyer if I want the property?
Nope. Well, as the buyer, if you were given a title insurance policy, and up to that date, they said your title was clear, and this item pops up after you've purchased the property. And like in the case that I mentioned, it was a case where the previous owner didn't disclose it, and the previous owner is responsible for it. That's an issue that could be a claim, that the new owner has a legitimate claim on their insurance policy. They would file a claim to get that corrected, to get that lien off of their property. And that's where the title insurance comes in. As the title agent, they would research that and either, go back to the seller and get the seller to take care of it. If not, if it leads into litigation, then the insurance would defend you as the buyer your interest, because you were told and you were given a title policy saying everything was okay.
Right, you're relying on the seller's good faith.
Exactly.
And if they're lying, I would think that. Well, I don't know if they end up in trouble in some way, but ultimately, hopefully, it gets resolved so the buyer can get into the house. Exactly. Now, illegal deeds. You hear stories about people just can make up their own deed. I mean, tell me about illegal deeds, and you can maybe share if you know a story or if you've been through a story.
Sure. Well, and this ties into kind of forgeries. Is the where we see illegal deeds? They're illegally prepared. They're illegally signed. The person signing up, basically they forged a deed, and we've had cases, in the not so recent past that when the title was examined and this deed was examined, it looked very legit. It was a case where a bank acquired a property back through foreclosure process, and the bank, some unscrupulous fraudster out there, just created a deed from the bank to himself, and then turned around and sold that property, without having right to it.
I mean, it's a piece of paper. Is it stamped in any way? Is there something that would distinguish it, make it easily distinguishable from something that's fraudulent? Like credit cards have the magnetic strip or the little chip. Is there anything that distinguishes it, or a normal person would look at it and say, oh, yes, this is real and legitimate?
Oh, well, probably your average consumer might not even, be tipped off that it's a fraud. But, in our industry, we have things that we look for, and also other items that get recorded with deeds to ensure the validity of that deed. But the fraudsters are getting good. So,
oh boy, that's kind of scary. A scary thing. Yeah. Now, what about missing heirs?
And this is another common one in our state. We've got lots of retirees, here in Florida, with heirs that are perhaps, in other states. So how title insurance protects in that case is, let's say you buy a piece of property from the estate of a deceased person.
Okay.
It is part of the title company's duties to make sure that there was no one missed in the estate that could come back and later say, oh, that was my great-grandmother and I'm an heir to her estate and I actually have a right to that property, not Laurie. So title insurance protects you, Laurie, against something like that happening.
Wow. I'm sure there are lots of surprises in what you do.
Yep.
Okay. And then we talked a little bit about forgeries. Mm-hmm. You see that a lot?
You do. Fortunately, if the title company does what they're supposed to do, they can catch those. But unfortunately, it sometimes missed. There are items that get recorded on public records that were not signed by the person that should have signed it. So that's a huge one that, again, title insurance will protect if that occurs.
So title insurance, is that mandatory that you have title insurance on a property or not?
Well, if you are purchasing a home and you're using financing from a bank, the bank is going to require that they have a loan policy for their protection. And generally, if you're going to get a loan policy, you're going to get an owner's title policy for the property owner at the same time.
Okay, because there's protection on both. But if you're just going out, you're an investor and you're paying cash for a property, that's when you might skip the title and then end up in trouble down the road.
You might, but yes, it's highly recommended to make the small investment in title insurance to protect that cash outlay that you're getting ready to do if you're an investor. And which brings me back to another point, like homeowners insurance, title is an insurance policy protecting against a loss, should the condition of the title be something other than what was insured. But unlike homeowners insurance, the issues that arise are from things that happen in the past chain of title, not some unforeseen future event like a hurricane or a car accident, which is what homeowner insurance and car insurance protects. So you're really protecting yourself on stuff
from the back
from
end.
the past, that could pop up. And then unlike homeowners insurance, the cost of title insurance is a one-time fee. It's not an annual renewal or a monthly thing. It's just paid for once at the closing, and then you've got that policy in place until that buyer sells the property later on down the road. So.
Gotcha. Okay, very good. And what is an undiscovered encumbrance?
An encumbrance is similar to a lien. It's very similar to an unknown lien. So an encumbrance is just another word for something that could attach to the property and cause a title issue.
Gotcha. Okay. And unknown easements.
This is another thing that title insurance will protect against. Generally, when a buyer purchases a home, again, using whether they're using financing or cash, they have an option to get a boundary survey for their property. And if there is an easement on that property that perhaps was not discovered, and let's just say it's an easement for access. Maybe there's an easement between two properties that gives the general public access to some sort of park or lake, that might be situated behind the property. If that wasn't disclosed to a buyer and it kind of impedes how they wanted to use that property, that could be a title claim. They could be protected against that if it wasn't disclosed to them, because that impedes how they planned
to use the property. Right. Well, stay with me. We're going to come back in just a second and continue talking about title. Stay with us.
Hello, I'm Jim Velasquez. Does getting a lousy 1% on your CDs make you sick to your stomach? Inflation is hovering at 3%, so what's really happening? Allow me, Jim Velasquez, to send you my free report. If you haven't reviewed your CDs in a while, don't get this report. It will break your heart. If you want to fight back and beat the bank, text RETIRE to 72727 for this free report. Let's beat the bank. Text RETIRE to 72727 for your free report.
Do you suffer from back, neck, or body pain? Do you suffer from migraines or have jaw or face pain? Has conventional medicine failed you? Were you injured or in an accident? Call chiropractic physician Dr. Dan Maddock at 813-935-1664. Dr. Dan has helped thousands of patients gain relief for more than 30 years. Dr. Dan is caring, gentle, and takes his time with each patient. He's also a past president of the International Craniopathic Society, a special certification of only 300 chiropractors worldwide. Dr. Dan helps patients from the neck up and the neck down. Dr. Dan accepts most insurance plans. Don't continue to live in pain. Call 813-935-1664 today. That's 813-935-1664 and get on track to better health. You're listening to the Half Empty, Half Full radio show on the Tan Talk Radio Network. And now, here's your host, the consumer champion, Laurie Zoock.
And welcome back. I'm with Joellyn Robles, and she is from Hillsborough Title. And we're talking about title companies. And we're going to get into a little bit later about how you can avoid horror type situations and what you can do if you've been a victim. But we've been talking about common title problems, and survey disputes is one of the things on my list. Now, I've seen situations where a homeowner wants to buy a property, and then he buys the property, and the next door neighbor says, "Wait a minute, you can't put up a fence there. That's my that 12 inches is on my survey, and that's my property." Well, how did that happen, and what do you do?
Well, great question, Laurie. Yep, you do have that happen. A boundary survey will tell you what the boundary lines to a particular piece of property is, and you don't have boundary disputes so much in platted subdivisions, like your, regular subdivisions are lot and block, so it's kind of pretty clear cut where
more the homeowners' clone homes, as I call them. See, I'm from New Jersey, so we didn't have as many of those. Everybody pretty much had their individualized house, not in an HOA.
Right.
But I know down here there are places that are not under HOA. So, do you see situations like that?
We do, and sometimes they arise in more rural areas where you have bigger pieces of property where the legal descriptions are what we call meets and bounds. So they're long legal descriptions that say, 30 feet from this point, go this way, 30 degrees, west or east. It's a long legal description. And sometimes if there are either errors in that or more property involved or less property involved, there could be disputes, among the neighbors.
I gotcha. But a more common easement would be if, you're in a community where there's a sidewalk running through the front of the property. And so in other words, maybe the first 10 or 20 or 30 feet is considered shared property. Do I have that right? Is it sort of public but yet private, and you're required as the homeowner to maintain it, but anyone can walk down?
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty common. In most neighborhoods, the sidewalks are common areas. And you're right. Even though it's a common area, if it's kind of your property, they sometimes ask you to mow that little corner that's not really yours, but
right.
Good.
It's exactly. And what do you do in the case of an undiscovered will? We talked about missing heirs, but do you ever come across that type of a situation?
It's similar to a missing heir, but again, if the due diligence has been done, you're not going to have an issue with that. The title insurance is going to cover that. But there could be a case where, a second will was executed by the deceased, and it just sort of pops up.
Right. Well, not everybody records them, so.
Well, they generally
probably don't.
Yeah.
Okay, so you got a little surprise there. Okay, now here comes a good one for you. False impersonation of a previous owner.
Oh yes, that goes right along with fraud and forgeries. One case that I can give you as an example is, let's say you have a husband and wife that are in the midst of a divorce, and they need to sell the property or want to sell the property or what have you. And, if one spouse isn't on board, the other party can maybe get someone to impersonate that spouse to, try to sell the property. That's one example that I can give that's actually happened. Is we've had an individual posing as one of the spouses trying to sell the property.
Right. You can see me rolling my eyes over here, because I can think of situations. I can think of one where two people owned a property, and at the time they were husband and wife. Ultimately divorced years later. The husband still hadn't sold the property per the court order.
Right.
Running. The wife finally said, I'm going to try and keep my interest. I'm going to send the letters. Yeah. But ultimately, nothing happened. But what she discovered was, by going to the tax assessor's office, that the ex-husband in the last 10 years removed the ex-wife from the tax records.
Okay.
So I know that can't be it has to be illegal, because now what happens if he tries to go ahead? So it looks like he now owns the property. I don't know the whole story, but it looks like he owns it. Now, what if he decides he's going to try and sell it, or if he passes, it goes to, the estate of one side of the family and not the other? Have you ever heard anything like that?
Well, in a nutshell, kind of, but it'd be really difficult to speak to that situation without,
Right, it's general.
It's very general.
Right, no legal advice here, just general.
No, yes. As a title agent, I am in no way, shape, or form an attorney and cannot give any legal advice. But I could say to that, if it's a transaction that involved a title company, the title company would be responsible for checking everything that would be required for that individual to sell the property. So if there was a former spouse that was still on title, that would be revealed and then dealt with, accordingly. So
Gotcha.
I can say that, as a buyer, if they've got that on the flip end, that the title company will do their due diligence to make sure that an issue doesn't arise down the road.
Got it. Okay. Now let's talk about horror stories. You had actually sent me a story. I'm going to let you explain it.
Sure.
There's it's called KEL. Tell me the story of KEL.
Well, KEL was an underwriter, a title insurance underwriter that had capital of about $3 million. As a title company, as an underwriter of an title insurance, you have to have certain assets set aside in the event, let's say, an issue does arise and one of your policyholder files a claim, you've got to have
money to be able to pay the claim,
be able
right?
to pay the claim, exactly. So with this particular company, just in very general terms, they had, I believe, theft of their escrow account, which depleted their capital, and then subsequently they had some claims on policies they had written that exceeded their capital. So those, where is that money going to come from to pay those claims? What has subsequently happened this year, as a matter of fact, it will start. It'll take an effect. It was decided that all the other title companies that are out there now will have to start charging a surcharge on closings going forward, and I think it begins in September, that will basically go into a fund to pay for those policies written by KEL that are now there's
everybody
no
else is kind of getting punished for what? Oh, that makes me crazy.
Yeah.
For what one bad company did.
Yes.
Now, do you know, was it ever determined who actually took the money from out of the escrow? Do you know if it was someone that worked there or?
I don't know the details. I just kind of know in a nutshell what happened and what's causing us to now have to charge the consumers some extra money to go into this pool to pay for that.
Oh,
so.
that's terrible. Why don't you share some other stories of title companies that maybe did the wrong thing?
Well, the most common form of wrongdoing is stealing from an escrow account, which could take the form of paying bills out of paying personal bills out of the escrow account, or one of the ways they kind of keep the ball rolling, so to speak, to perpetrate this fraud is not paying off mortgages that should have been paid off through a closing and claiming that they did but didn't. So that's the biggest form of wrongdoing that we see, and like I guess in any industry, you've got a couple bad apples that kind of make it bad
for everybody else.
So.
Does anybody here's the part. It's pretty much if you're a company and you're putting money into escrow, right? You have a separate account. You're supposed to be held to a higher standard.
Right.
You're licensed and insured and all that. You're really, if you're the company owner or employee, you're actually self-monitoring, correct? Is there actually an agency or is there somebody monitoring a licensed company that places money into escrow for a client?
Oh, absolutely,
there
yes.
Is.
As a title company, we are governed by the Florida...
By an agency in Florida?
Florida Department of Financial Services.
Okay. So
they monitor us, and title companies get audited. Their underwriters audit them to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to, and they're paying monies to the people they say they are in accordance to the settlement statements that are, produced for each closing. So we're definitely very heavily monitored as a title company and our escrow accounts as well.
All right. So how does a consumer, someone listening, how do they differentiate between a reputable title agency and a disreputable title agency? Is there a way to find out before you do business with a company? How do you check them out?
Yeah, actually, Better Business Bureau is a great resource. There's a website called sunbiz.com where you can actually check out any company and see that they are, registered with the state of Florida to do business. And in that website, they give you when the business was formed. So definitely longevity of a company, could play a role. You want to choose someone that's been around for a while, not maybe someone that opened up shop yesterday and has no history. There's another website called myfloridacfo.com where you can actually check an individual and see if they are a licensed title agent within the state of Florida. So that's a great website to check. And you can also, find out what underwriter a title company uses and make sure that their underwriter is financially sound and stable. You definitely want to, have your insurance policy written by a company that is well backed financially. So should you have a claim, you don't have to worry about whether or not that claim is getting paid.
Right. And I have more questions on this. Hang on just for a second. We're going to go to a brief commercial break and we'll be back in just a second.
Great.
Do you suffer from back, neck, or body pain? Do you suffer from migraines or have jaw or face pain? Has conventional medicine failed you? Were you injured or in an accident? Call chiropractic physician Dr. Dan Maddock at 813-935-1664. Dr. Dan has helped thousands of patients gain relief for more than 30 years. Dr. Dan is caring, gentle, and takes his time with each patient. He's also a past president of the International Craniopathic Society, a special certification of only 300 chiropractors worldwide. Dr. Dan helps patients from the neck up and the neck down. Dr. Dan accepts most insurance plans. Don't continue to live in pain. Call 813-935-1664 today. That's 813-935-1664 and get on track to better health.
Hello, I'm Jim Velasquez. Does getting a lousy 1% on your CDs make you sick to your stomach? Inflation is hovering at 3%, so what's really happening? Allow me, Jim Velasquez, to send you my free report. If you haven't reviewed your CDs in a while, don't get this report. It will break your heart. If you want to fight back and beat the bank, text RETIRE to 72727 for this free report. Let's beat the bank. Text RETIRE to 72727 for your free report.
And welcome back. I am with Joellyn Robles, and she's from Hillsborough Title. And we've been talking about, common title programs. We've been talking about horror stories. We were talking about how consumers differentiate between a reputable title agency and a disreputable one. And my favorite way, of course, is before I do business with a person or a company, is you will Google their name and the word complaint next to it. Really simple, because a lot of times if people have filed a complaint, you'll see it, online on some of the boards, or you might see it on a website like Rip Off Report where you can read through them and see, what the difference is. Now, has your company, and again, you don't have to give any names, but has your company ever had to take over a problem from another title company to try and solve? And if so, how did you solve it?
Yeah, it's not uncommon for us to kind of inherit a file, from another company or, either a real estate agent that maybe had trouble with getting it closed somewhere else. And one of the common issues that we deal with in taking over a file is when there is a cloud on title that perhaps a prior company couldn't get resolved. And as I mentioned earlier, in order to clear a cloud on title, it usually involves getting either a corrective deed, getting some sort of release signed by the appropriate party to clear that item, or perhaps a court action is required to fix the problem. So we've been able to, obtain those corrective deeds or releases and take those other measures needed to clear the title where other companies have failed to do so. And, it just involves some persistence and some finesse in contacting the right parties, obtaining the right signatures and things of that nature to get things cleared up. So
now how do you said corrective, I've never heard corrective deed. So you're taking the job over maybe from another company that didn't know how to do it right, so to speak. And then you contact those companies, and then who actually makes up the piece of paper, the corrective deed?
Oh, well, the
title company does? Okay.
Yep, because it's a requirement of issuing the clear title is to generate, certain documents that will facilitate in creating.
Are title companies licensed and bonded? And can you explain, what does that mean?
Sure, yes. We are licensed through the Florida Department of Financial Services, and as a title agent, we're required to have certain number of credit hours in education. We go through a licensing process. We're fingerprinted, background check, things like that. And as a title company, we're also required to maintain O&E insurance, E&O insurance, which is errors and omissions insurance, in the event that one of the agents has a mistake that was either by an error or an omission.
Okay.
That covers kind of those types of human error type of mistakes. So
Gotcha. Okay. And then title escrow fraud, we kind of touched on that. Do you have any other stories you wanted to share?
No, I kind of
covered that.
Yeah, on the that's one of the most common forms of wrongdoing is the escrow fraud, and like I mentioned, and you got one bad apple makes it bad for the rest of us. But the background checks that licensed title agents are required to do hopefully kind of covers that from happening. So you definitely want to deal with a licensed title agent.
Okay, good pointer. Now, do title company rates vary, and is the fee associated with the cost of the property?
Well, a portion of the fees vary, and the reason I say that is, the title insurance is an insurance policy. So the rate that's charged for that insurance policy, it's promulgated. What that means is that the state of Florida sets what the minimum charge is for that policy. And the rate does vary based on the size of the transaction. So an owner's policy is typically based on the sales price that's been contracted, and then a lender's title policy is based on the loan amount that's being.
It's almost like, in a way, like, well, it's not homeowners insurance, but cost out that way. So if I have a $100,000 property versus $1 million property, I'm going to expect to pay more money in title insurance on the $1 million property. Exactly.
So that portion of the fee does not vary. It'll be the exact from title company to title company. Everybody has to charge the same. But what does vary are the ancillary fees associated with issuing the title policy, like the closing fee or the search fee. Those can vary widely among title companies. And those fees can also vary depending on the type of transaction that it is. So a buyer that's paying cash can expect to pay a little bit less of a closing fee than a buyer that's perhaps taking out a loan to buy the property, because there's a little bit more involved in the closing for a buyer when they have loan documents.
More work.
Exactly.
More paperwork. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Now, if I buy a property and I pay for title insurance, and let's say there's a problem with the title, does the insurance typically pay? In other words, what happens? What happens to the people? What happens to the property? I'm going to guess here, you probably try to resolve the issues first before you go to legal proceedings or anything like that. But can that person who just purchased the property end up losing the property if there was a problem with the title?
Well, it depends, and it's going to depend on the type of claim that it is. If it's a claim to where the title insurance underwriter feels that they can defend, they're going to assert that defense in court and try to, go to bat for you, so to speak. However, if the title insurance underwriter, if their defense isn't successful and you as the consumer are going to experience a loss because they couldn't defend it
and you lost the house because maybe you've moved into the house
exactly.
and you said things can pop back up later down the road.
Right.
Hey, I'm in the house for a few months now. All of a sudden there's a problem. Yikes, what do I do? And I'm going to have to pay money to move out and do the whole thing all over again.
Right.
So that's like a big pricey boo-boo.
Yeah. So if it's a defense that they're not successful and they have to pay the claim out, then they will pay you the claim. And what they pay you is up to the purchase price that you bought the house for, the amount on the owner's title policy. So what happens to the property will depend on, what the outcome was of that claim. So obviously if they pay you out and you have to move, you don't get the property. And so if they do pay you out, then the property goes back to the claimant.
Oh boy. Okay. So now, do you have any stories that you're aware of? Can you share any stories of maybe, strange situations that you've seen?
Sure. Well, this isn't so much anything I've seen, but an example of this situation could be, let's say you bought a property from an estate and, the title company searched what they were supposed to and did what they did to make sure you had clear title, and they issued you a policy that says, yes, Laurie, this property is free and clear, and let's just say you purchased it for $100,000 and you moved in and life is great for you in your new house. And maybe 6 months later, a year later, there's a grandkid that pops up and says, oh, no, I'm so-and-so's grandma who passed away, whose estate sold you the property.
Right.
If that goes to court and it's determined that grandkid is rightfully the heir of the person you bought the property from, the court could decide, hey, this kid gets the property back. And when I say kid, it could be an adult. I'm referring to an adult,
right.
grandchild or child or whatever. Not really a child, but
an adult child.
An adult child, yes. Because when you get minor children, it's a whole other ball of wax. But I'm referring to an adult child. And the court says, yes, this person is the rightful owner because they're a legitimate heir. Then you would have to move out, and the underwriter would pay you the $100,000 because that's what your policy was for. That's what you purchased it for. And then this person gets to move into that property because it was grandma's
house. Okay, I get the picture. Yeah, that could be messy on all sides, it sounds like. All right. Well, now, what can a consumer do if they think that a title company did something wrong or illegal? And of course, we're not giving legal advice here. Mm-hmm. I'm just doing educational opinion, because anybody can think that anybody did anything wrong. That's why we have lawyers that, they have that expression, they sue everybody and they see what sticks to the fan kind of thing. But, if you think your title company, maybe give me some examples of if I'm going to purchase a home and maybe the title company is not doing something right. What are cues? What are red flags to that title company?
If you're not being communicated to, if your questions aren't being answered, that's kind of a cue. If you feel that you've been, wronged in such a way that merits some further investigation, consumers can always call the Department of Financial Services. That's who governs title agents, and they do have a Bureau of Investigations that can be reached at 850-413-3136. I guess that would be the first step, is call the governing body of
the regulatory agency. Mm-hmm. I want to thank you for joining me today. Can you give out your contact information in the event that a listener would like to contact you?
Sure. My number is 813-732-7585.
Very good. Thank you for joining me. Join us every Thursday night at 11 p.m. for a new half-empty, half-full talk radio show. Learn something new every week and get smarter faster. Be safe.
No pleasure cruise.